morning sun lit the UN headquarters in New York as world leaders gathered. Ibrahim Traoré, in his traditional vest, walked calmly through buzzing corridors. His delegation's quiet confidence drew respect from diplomats who had seen his transformation of Burkina Faso. Cameras captured every handshake, every whisper, knowing alliances could shift. Traoré entered not as a supplicant, but as an equal, carrying Africa's pride. Security stirred as Donald Trump's entourage swept in, media swarming to frame his return as history. The contrast was clear. Trump's swagger and suit against Traoré's dignity and authenticity. Speculation grew, American bravado versus African pride. In a private room, advisor Aminata reminded him, 8% GDP growth, doubled literacy, infrastructure progress. You speak for every African child who dreams of freedom from condescension, she said. He nodded, aware of the moment's weight. Inside the main hall, 193 nations gathered. Traoré sat beneath the Burkina Faso nameplate. Messages of support flowing in from African leaders. Young diplomats leaned forward. History was unfolding. Trump entered dramatically, cameras flashing. Soon both men would face each other in a clash, destined to echo across continents and ignite a $100 million legal battle over respect and sovereignty. Meanwhile, CNN prepared its global stage. Anderson Cooper readied his interview. Trump settled into his chair, lights blazing, cameras rolling. The world waited. Expressions, words, and pride would define the moment. The control room buzzed as producers counted down to what would be one of the year's most explosive interviews. Social media teams readied hashtags, unaware they were about to witness diplomatic history. And so, Mr. Trump, you've been quite vocal about world leaders. Anderson Cooper began. Trump leaned forward, eyes gleaming, ready for controversy. Well, Anderson, let me tell you about these African leaders. I know Africa. I've done tremendous business there, he said, his gestures bold, his tone provocative. Then came the shift, his attack mode, squint, pursed lips, dismissive tilt. This Ibrahim Traoré in Burkina Faso. I know more about Burkina Faso than most people even know it exists. He's just another African dictator playing dress-up in traditional clothes while his people live in mud huts. The words landed like toxic smoke. Cooper froze, realizing they were broadcasting potential defamation to 50 million viewers. In the control room, panic mixed with excitement, ratings gold or legal disaster. Across Africa, families watched in disbelief as Trump's insult echoed. In Ouagadougou, Traoré sat in his palace, fury rising. His hands clenched, the ancestral cloth on his shoulders seeming to shimmer with power. Chief of Staff Aminata watched his face harden, sensing the dangerous calm before decisive action. Silence filled the room, heavy as a storm about to break. Young aide Moussa Kabore held his breath, sensing history pivot on his president's silence. The TV kept broadcasting, but all eyes fixed on Traoré, unmoving, calm on the surface, storm inside. His mind raced, centuries of colonial insults, patronizing lectures, dismissals that scarred Africa. He remembered the farmers who now harvested more, the children in new schools, the mothers who lived with hope. All their struggles converged into this single reckoning. Seconds ticked, 1, 2, 3. By the 17th, his decision was made. Ancestors seemed to whisper approval as his eyes left the screen and locked on his lawyer, Sawadogo. The room stiffened as Traoré rose, his presence commanding silence. This man thinks African dignity can be trampled for entertainment, he said, voice calm but edged with fire. Aminata, his chief of staff, saw the diplomat give way to the warrior. With measured steps, he reached for his phone, already drafting the orders that would summon legal firepower from across 3 continents. The silence had ended. Justice had begun. Young aide Moussa Kabore scribbled furiously, knowing every word would soon be etched into legal history. The evening call to prayer drifted through the windows, but inside the palace, a different ritual was unfolding. Traoré stopped pacing, his voice cutting through the silence. Get me President Macky Sall of Senegal, President Akufo-Addo of Ghana, and Chairman Moussa Faki of the African Union. Within minutes, secure lines connected Ouagadougou to African capitals. His words carried fire across the continent, transforming Trump's insult into a collective cause. By the fourth call, 3 presidents had pledged full support. Encrypted messages shot across Africa, from Cairo to Cape Town. What began as an attack on one leader had become an assault on African dignity itself. In the communications room, lawyer Sawadogo listened as Traoré laid out his plan. This isn't about money, it's about precedent. Africa will no longer accept being demeaned. The strategy crystallized, a defamation case that would force American courts to confront the meaning of African dignity. Damages would include Burkina Faso's global reputation, lost investment, and the immeasurable cost of restoring respect to a continent. Millions would be spent on legal firepower, but Traoré's resolve was unshakable. By midnight, the palace buzzed with activity. From his office window, Traoré looked out over sleeping Ouagadougou. "Tomorrow," he said, "the world will learn that insulting Africa comes with a $100 million price tag." Messages of support poured in from intellectuals, the diaspora, and civil rights groups. The night air carried the scent of baobab and the sound of distant drums, grounding him in the struggle of generations. With a firm signature, he authorized proceedings, each stroke a declaration that Africa would never again bow to humiliation. At Sawadogo and Associates, the midnight conference room filled with urgency. Burkina Faso's best legal minds prepared for a case that would reshape international law and rewrite history. Matra Burma Sawadogo stood at the head of the mahogany table, laptops glowing like beacons of justice. Screens displayed precedents from defamation cases spanning 3 continents. Senior partners had rushed in within hours of Traoré's call, their faces heavy with the gravity of taking on a former U.S. president. Young associates scoured tort law. Paralegals stacked towers of Trump's inflammatory remarks, and the air grew thick with determination and caffeine. Outside, Ouagadougou slept, unaware its legal district had become the epicenter of a diplomatic earthquake. At 2 a.m., Sawadogo's voice cut through the room. "We need the best firms in New York, London, and Geneva." Research Chief Fatou Matakone presented the shortlist, battle-tested specialists in high-stakes international defamation. The plan was clear: establish jurisdiction in multiple courts, quantify reputational damage, and calculate economic loss with surgical precision. Some warned of astronomical costs. Sawadogo's answer was simple: the president has authorized unlimited funding. Encrypted emails flew out within minutes, summoning the finest legal minds across time zones. By dawn, a dream team had formed. A secure video conference lit up the war room. Jonathan Mitchell, the New York legend of impossible cases. Sarah Chen from London, master of international defamation. Dr. Klaus Weber from Geneva, veteran of global tribunals. Their hourly rates exceeded the GDP of small nations, but money no longer mattered. This was war for dignity. Sawadogo unveiled Traoré's signed authorization for unlimited spending. Across continents, the world's top lawyers understood they were preparing for a landmark trial that would rewrite international law. Databases filled with a decade of Trump's disparaging remarks about Africa, each insult stacked onto the scales of justice. Wire transfers surged from Burkina Faso's treasury to Manhattan, London, and Geneva. What began as a television insult was now weaponized into the most expensive lawsuit in African history. The war for respect had officially begun. Money moved as fast as the insult itself. By 6 a.m., contracts worth more than many nations' annual legal budgets were signed electronically, forging the most formidable defamation alliance in history. Within 72 hours, filings would hit U.S. courts, an unprecedented timeline for a case of this magnitude. As dawn broke over Ouagadougou, lawyers dispersed, carrying with them the weight of a continent's dignity. Hours later, Manhattan's Foley Square witnessed the unimaginable. Jonathan Mitchell and a team of 12 attorneys marching through marble corridors with briefcases holding 847 pages of legal firepower. Clerks froze mid-task as the lawsuit, valued at $100 million, landed like a diplomatic bomb on their desks. The assigned case number, 125 Severson 834, would soon echo through history. At 10:47 a.m. Eastern, Ibrahim Traoré's quest for justice officially entered the American legal system. By 10:52, Reuters pushed the alert. Burkina Faso president files $100 million defamation suit against Donald Trump. Within minutes, CNN, BBC, and Al Jazeera broke the story. Markets jolted as Trump's stocks dropped 3 points. Producers hounded legal scholars for commentary on a case without precedent. Outside the courthouse, cameras crowded the steps. Social media erupted with "Got Dignity," "Africa Fights Back," and "Respect Africa" trending worldwide. Trump's legal team scrambled, caught flat-footed by a lawsuit they never imagined. The shockwaves spread globally. Documents were translated into dozens of languages as African embassies rallied in support. The African Union convened an emergency session declaring solidarity. In Europe, diplomats whispered nervously about a precedent that could rewrite the rules of international speech. At Harvard, Oxford, and the Sorbonne, scholars debated whether this case would finally force the world to balance free expression with dignitary protection. For diaspora communities, it became a rallying cry. From London to Los Angeles, chants of solidarity echoed through the streets. By nightfall, the lawsuit was the most discussed legal filing in the history of international defamation. Meanwhile, Trump Tower went into crisis mode. His board calculated the devastation of a potential $100 million judgment. Insurance firms scrambled, unsure if their policies could absorb the blow. What began as a televised insult had detonated into the legal earthquake of the century. Its tremors spreading from New York courtrooms to every corner of the world. Actuaries worked overtime, scrambling to quantify risks no insurer had ever faced. International law firms circled both sides, eager for a share of legal fees projected to exceed the GDP of small nations. Within hours of the Manhattan filing, Traoré's team launched companion suits in London and Geneva, unleashing a three-front legal offensive against Trump's business empire. CNN shifted from routine coverage to full-scale crisis programming. Legal analysts dissected the filings while markets reeled, Trump-linked stocks swinging wildly in after-hours trading. By midnight, the $100 million claim was no longer a lawsuit. It was a global phenomenon testing the limits of American law and international dignity. CNN's breaking banner glowed across the world. Anderson Cooper, visibly strained, reported on the firestorm his own interview had sparked, even as CNN's lawyers calculated their potential liability for airing Trump's remarks. 17 seconds of silence, replayed endlessly, had now become $100 million in legal consequences. The irony struck millions. CNN was both the messenger and the accidental catalyst. Its stock plunged and spiked in the same hour as investors debated the network's exposure. Social media accelerated the drama, hashtags exploding faster than any political scandal in memory. Trump on trial and Africa Fights Back trended globally as monitoring teams compared engagement levels to those of terrorist attacks or natural disasters. Meanwhile, Fox News seized the moment, framing the lawsuit as America's sovereignty on trial. Tucker Carlson fanned the flames with debates over whether foreign leaders should have standing in U.S. courts. Partisan outrage drowned out legal nuance, but ratings soared. Trump loyalists rallied, critics cheered, and the network's social channels broke records. International networks told a different story. Al Jazeera emphasized African assertiveness and post-colonial justice with jubilant coverage from its African bureaus. BBC World Service wrestled with neutrality, caught between Britain's legal traditions and America's absolutist free speech creed. Across Europe, newspapers treated the case as a philosophical test of speech versus dignity, filling front pages from Le Monde to Die Zeit. Within 48 hours, the defamation suit generated more coverage than most presidential elections. Global media deployed resources usually reserved for wars or natural disasters. The world was no longer just reporting on a lawsuit. It was witnessing the collision of African dignity and American exceptionalism in real time. African media spoke with one voice, framing Traoré's lawsuit as a landmark defense of continental dignity. Editorials praised his decision, while American late-night comedians struggled to find humor in a case too serious for mockery. Legal reporters noted that the filings read less like lawsuits and more like diplomatic manifestos, and law blogs crashed under the weight of global interest. At the African Union in Addis Ababa, unity erupted. All 55 member states rallied behind Burkina Faso, delegates declaring in every language that Africa would no longer tolerate disrespect. The whole turned into a liberation rally as leaders pledged millions to fund Traoré's legal battle. Within hours, a $50 million war chest was raised. From Cape Verde to South Africa, the message was the same. When one African leader is insulted, the entire continent rises to defend its dignity. The African Union Assembly fell silent as Professor Thuli Madonela declared that the lawsuit was more than about money. It was proof that African dignity has measurable value in international law. Nigeria pledged legal support, Kenya promised diplomatic backing, and the African Development Bank opened special funding channels. Within hours, Africa's top institutions and leaders united behind Traoré, transforming a personal grievance into a continental crusade. A unanimous AU resolution, signed by all 55 member states, demanded global respect for African sovereignty and warned of diplomatic consequences for future insults. Outside, thousands of students celebrated in Addis Ababa as news of solidarity spread. For the first time in modern history, Africa spoke with one voice. Meanwhile, in New York, the world turned to Manhattan Federal Court, where Judge Margaret Holloway presided over Traoré versus Trump, quickly dubbed the dignity case of the century. The battle lines were drawn, African dignity versus American defamation, in a courtroom that would decide far more than damages. Trump's lawyers argued that political speech was absolutely protected under the First Amendment, but the courtroom bristled with tension as Traoré's team unveiled meticulous evidence. Economist Dr. Amina Hassan testified that Trump's remarks had already cost Burkina Faso $40 million in lost tourism and delayed investment. Cambridge's Professor James Crawford explained the doctrine of dignitary sovereignty, framing the case as part of international law's recognition of reputational harm. The defense's dismissive tone backfired, reinforcing the very disrespect on trial. Meanwhile, companion suits advanced in London and Geneva, creating a three-pronged legal assault on Trump's empire. British courts scrutinized the impact on Commonwealth markets, while the ICJ debated whether heads of state deserved explicit protection from systematic defamation. Mounting legal bills, failed immunity claims, and skeptical judges left Trump's team scrambling. What began as a televised insult had become the most sophisticated international legal offensive ever mounted against a former Western leader. International briefs flooded in, with even the EU backing the idea that dignity crosses borders. What began as defamation had become a global referendum on respect between civilizations. In a packed Manhattan courtroom, Judge Margaret Holloway delivered a 127-page ruling. Trump's remarks were malicious defamation. Damages totaled $110 million, the largest personal defamation award in U.S. history. Markets shook as Trump's empire scrambled to cover emergency asset freezes. Outside, Traoré declared, "Today, African dignity has measurable value, and that value is $110 million. The African Union erupted in celebration, calling the verdict a turning point in post-colonial history. Within months, law schools taught the case, European courts cited it, and the AU launched new dignity protocols. Trump's appeal failed, while Traoré's victory inspired other African leaders to file similar suits. A year later, standing at the UN, Traoré was hailed as the global symbol of dignitary protection, his legal triumph having transformed African respect from a demand into binding international law.